right, that should be going live. I should probably say that I'm live on Twitch. Oh, there's my link. Oh, hopefully I sent that to the right class. Oh, I did. Good, good, good. And I'm just waiting for my app to update here. Oh, hey. Sweet. Can you hear me pretty well? I already see someone in the chat room. Is the audio okay tonight? Sweet. All right. So it might be a very small classroom tonight. I tried to pick the night where the most people could attend. This is probably the most intensive activity that I'm going to go through, most intense, like programming type activity that we're going to go through the whole semester. And I'm kind of excited about it. Databases are something that you can actually turn into a career. You could become a database systems administrator, a DBA. You could find yourself writing database queries for a living, making reports out of databases for a living. Technically, any job where you're putting data into a system, you're probably working with databases. So like I said in our announcement this week, databases run the world. And I'm doing you a disservice if we don't talk about them. And I know that there are several other classes at mid that cover databases and introduce them to you like over the course of several weeks. We're going to compact it all into 1 week by looking just at the MySQL database. I'm sorry, just at the WordPress MySQL database. And I think we've run some commands already. Once we installed WordPress, we actually had to run a few MySQL commands to create the database. And we're going to kind of pick up with the virtual machine where we left it off last week. So if you need to refer back to last week's live stream where we installed WordPress, pause here and go do that. Let me bring up my screen real quick. So, you know what? I have editing turned on here in Moodle. Let me turn that off so that all these buttons go away. So this week in Moodle, it's all about web database concepts. And I have provided links to some pretty big Lynda courses. I think one of them's like 4 hours, and one of them, I think it's the MySQL one that is pretty lengthy. It includes a whole chapter about installing WordPress. And we already did that last week from the command line. So a lot of that is not relevant, and you can skip ahead in it. This will introduce you to some of the queries I'm going to show you tonight and many, many others. But I also provided a link to another lynda.com course called Learning Relational Databases. And if you've never worked with databases before, I'd recommend checking this out. And if you have worked with databases, it might be worth going through the list of videos and watching some to just refresh your memory. But the MySQL database that we've been using is a relational database. Other relational databases that you might have used in the past include something like SQLite, PostgreSQL, or Microsoft SQL Server. And if you've taken classes at mid, it's probably been with the Microsoft Access database. That too is a relational database in many ways. The goal of a relational database is to allow you to define tables that hold content and then connect those pieces of content together so that you don't duplicate yourself or duplicate data in your database. And I'm going to be talking more about that in a little bit. For your activities this week, we're continuing layout land, of course, but we're also going to be focusing on a database definitions activity. This is a forum, and it's a special type of forum. You're going to be posting your own definition of each of these terms, and you can watch the Lynda videos or do some Google searching or use this live stream to answer some of the questions. When I taught this class face-to-face, I included a picture of what the result would be. I would write all of these words up on the board, and I'd have people come up with a whiteboard marker and connect a line between any two terms. And as you can see, by the end of the night, as they connected each line, they would have to say how the two terms were related. Just like you're doing in this activity, you have to define each term by using the other words to do the defining. And by the end of the night, and by the end of this activity, you're going to see how everything is interconnected. It's one of my favorite activities to do in class, and I hope this goes well online. In order for for you to see what other people have written, you have to reply with your own definition first. And then, I don't know if it's immediate, it might be like the next day in Moodle, or the next time you log in Moodle, it'll show you what other students have written for their definitions. But these are the words that you probably hear me talk about tonight: records, tables, forms, queries, data types, relationships, fields, primary key fields, and foreign key fields. And I've hand selected a few queries that will get at the heart of data types, relationships, and these key fields, the primary and the foreign keys, for tonight. So I'm hoping that I will be supporting this activity tonight when I give you some example queries. So you might be wondering, why do I ask you to write a definition using the other words? Isn't that like a catch-22 or like Inception or an infinite loop? And it kind of is. But my main goal with the database unit in this web design class is to help you get more comfortable talking and working with databases. And the only way that you will gain that comfort and familiarity is just to start using the words. And I think just like when you learn a foreign language, I think as you start using the words and seeing how they're related to each other, the more skilled you become and the more proficient you become at working with the concept of a database. So that's really the goal for that activity. I don't think anyone has started posting in there, so please don't be afraid. Please start posting maybe like a definition or 3 definitions a day, so that we can start building on our digital whiteboard, so to speak, that will connect all of these definitions. Now, after this demo tonight, I am hopeful that you will be prepared to write a journal about the WordPress database. And in that journal prompt, I've asked a few questions that I'd like to keep in mind tonight. What database tables store the page content you've posted so far? Write a SQL query that displays this content. We will be doing that tonight. In a relational database, efficient storage is a top priority. And then I explain what normal form is and how a relational database works. We're going to be referring to that tonight. What happens when you update a page from the WordPress admin area? Can you update this information directly in the database? Write a query that does this. There will also be an example query tonight that will help you with this, and I'm sure you can think of other queries to demonstrate this as well. This is a full journal entry, so you'll also be talking about what you've been doing this week, and I'd particularly like to know how the lynda.com courses, how they work at explaining databases, and how this live stream fits in. So those are the assignments this week. Without any further ado, I pasted a link in Slack, and that's what I'm going to be referring to tonight. So I'm going to check the chat room. Are you able to pull up that document and follow along that way? I'm going to increase my zoom level here. Okay, someone replied that they're going to try to pull it up right now. I'm going to try to hide it so your name doesn't appear when you join the document. So I'm going to hide that so I don't see who's connected, but let me know when you have it open. Oh, someone does have it open. Great. So the first thing that I want to do is make sure that you can connect to your VM still. So I'm going to try to arrange my screen so that we have my notes up and we also have my Linux VM up. So remember, I am not running VirtualBox on this computer because it would literally melt this poor machine. Instead, and I'm going to try to zoom this up, I will be connecting with SSH to the computer that is running my virtual machine. And actually, I'm going to connect directly to the virtual machine with SSH. So I'm pretty sure I remember my IP address for that VM internally. I'm going to try to connect to it. Oh, and it's still running. And I have to try to remember my password. I don't think that's it. I tried to encourage everyone to write down their passwords so that they can still connect. I connected to the VM. This is still the Ubuntu one that I had set up. My IP address thankfully stayed the same even when I turned on this VM a week later. Now, that might be solely dependent on my home network. When I taught this class in the computer labs at Mid, it was actually very often that students would sit in a different spot, or even if they restarted their computer, or if they were on their laptop and they connected to their computer after a week, they would get a different IP address. And you might find that you have received a different IP address. If you wrote down the IP address, I would actually recommend before you try connecting over SSH that you try to visit that VM in your web browser. Now, luckily, mine still pulls up WordPress. But if this IP address does not work for letting you get to your web server, you might have to go to the VirtualBox and try to log into the VM without SSH, just directly on the virtual machine to figure out what the IP address is. And there, when you log in, it should tell you what the IP address of your machine is up at the top, just like it did right here. It tells me the IP address right here. There's another command that you can type in if you don't see that when you log in called ifconfig, interface config. That will list hopefully at least one network connection that has an IP address that's recognizable to you. Right here's the 192 address for my internal machine. If your IP address has changed, WordPress is going to break. You might be able to type in that new IP address to SSH or to get to the web browser, get to it in a web browser. But WordPress is very, very picky about its identity. It needs to know what address it is running on. And so if your IP address changes, WordPress could very much break. Now, all is not lost. The activity that we're going through tonight makes it possible for you to edit the WordPress settings to tell it what IP address it's running on. And I have a section in the Google Doc, if that has happened to you, that you can use. Someone in the chat room said that they had to that they still have to restart the whole thing. They got a massive error when they installed WordPress. That massive error might be because maybe you started installing it and then your IP address changed. So maybe we can look at that together after the stream. I'd be happy to help you get it running. Okay, so I'm connected over SSH. I've been able to connect over the browser. Let's do some MySQL stuff. I think we talked about how if you wanted to connect as root to the MySQL server, you could actually type sudo MySQL. But I'd rather not use the root MySQL user. I'd rather use the user that we created when we installed WordPress. And if you don't remember what the username and password was, you can still get to that wp-config.php file and take a look at what you set them to. I actually had to do that because I couldn't remember the password that I had typed. So in order to do that, I think I had to sudo, and then I think I used nano, and it was var www wordpress wp-config.php, and it's going to ask me for my password here. When I was in this file, it's these yellow values here where the name of the database was WordPress, the name of the database user was WordPress user. I had forgotten that. And then the password that we had used, because this was being recorded and put on the internet, was just password. I couldn't remember for the life of me what the password was, and I kind of laughed at myself when I realized that I just left it at password. So that's what we need right now. I am going to, I have to move this so my video is in the way. Hey, there we go. Okay. So I'm going to try to connect with this MySQL command right here. So MySQL, I can run without sudo, and I can actually pass it a couple flags. -u allows me to specify the username. So that's going to be the WordPress user. And then if I add a -p flag after that, separated by spaces, I'm asking MySQL to prompt me for the password. When I hit enter, MySQL is going to say, okay, tell me your secret password. And remember, it is not that secret today. And hopefully you're able to get in. When you see the MySQL greater than sign, that's the MySQL prompt. That means that you're connected. You'll be able to hopefully run a command like show databases. You know what? I didn't put that in my notes, but I think we used this one before. Show databases will show you the databases that you have access to. I'm going to add this to my note. So show databases. When we're ready to start writing queries, we actually have to indicate to MySQL what we're going to be querying against. So we're going to use the WordPress database. And you'll notice that a lot of the commands that I run in MySQL all end in a semicolon. And the reason that is that you might have a really long query that you want to type, and you might want it to be across several lines. So MySQL is going to keep waiting until it reads a special symbol, typically the semicolon, to run the command. So I could actually type something like show, hit enter, and then type tables, hit enter, and it's still waiting for more commands. That's the end of my command. If I put a semicolon in, then it actually runs the MySQL command. And the query that we just wrote, called show tables, is actually going to show you all the tables that are in this database. Now, I like to think of tables as kind of like the tabs in a spreadsheet, if you're used to using Excel. There's one database that contains all the content. My user has access to that database. Inside of that database, there's multiple tables. Each of these tables is like an entity or a thing that's going to be stored with the same type of data over and over. So let's read through these real quick. We've got WP comments, WP links, WP options. As you look through this list, can you figure out where my pages and my posts might be stored? What table do you think WordPress is going to keep those things that I've been creating, the blog posts and the tables? Would you consider MySQL to be forgiving in how you use it? That is a great question. I would say it is not very forgiving. In fact, no database system that I work with is forgiving. Databases really, really, really want you to tell it the type of data you're going to keep, and then when you write queries, you have to adhere to what you agreed to. You have to fulfill that commitment. The commands are not very forgiving. But okay, the next response in the chat room was the posts. So yes, WP posts. So that's the table name where all of our posts and pages are going to be stored. Great guess. At this point, I usually hear from students like, why do they start with WP? And this goes back to the days when some people might try to run their own WordPress installation on a shared web server. And so they had WordPress running, but then someone else had another WordPress server running, or another WordPress site running on the same database host. And they might only get one database. It might not be able to have separate databases for each WordPress site. So way back in the day, they decided we're going to underscore or prefix all of our table names with WP. And I don't think I ever ran more than one WordPress in the same database, but it's technically possible. You could actually tell WordPress to use a different prefix. So you might have WordPress 1 underscore posts and then WordPress 2 underscore posts. I think you're onto something with WP posts holding the content. So my next favorite command to run is the describe command. So I'm going to describe WP underscore posts, and I'm going to end it with a semicolon. And this is where I need to make my screen a little bit larger. Let's see if I can get this to fit on one screen in the live stream. Okay, so there's 23 rows returned from this command. It is actually 23 different fields. There is a field called ID, a field called post author, post date, post content, post title, post excerpt, post status. 23 different fields. That in the first column is the name of the field. In the second column is the type. So one of the terms that you have to define is data type. You'll see the different data types that MySQL supports being used by WordPress. So there's this big int that's actually an integer. That's a number like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It has to be an integer, a whole number. There's date time fields in here. There's long text fields. It stores a lot of text content. There's shorter text fields. There are varchar, variable character. These are even shorter than text for things like status, comment status, ping status. Let's see, are there any other types? We talked about date time, long text, varchar. No, I think those are the main ones that I see in here. The next column tells you whether any of these fields allow a null. If you've never heard the word null before, it means like empty or nothing. You can actually make fields be required. In fact, all of these fields require a value. Many of them actually come with a default value. So if you don't insert a date, it's going to populate it with 000 in it, so it won't leave the field empty. I skipped over the key. This is definitely connected to that primary key and foreign key concept that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And in the extra column, it has some extra behaviors on some of these fields. So this very first one, the ID field, this is an integer, a number, so it actually starts counting at like 1 and it increments by 1. So the next post that I try to put in this table, the WP post table, will automatically get the next higher number, the next higher integer. So that is the WP post table. If I wanted to see something that's in there, we need to write different types of queries. Now, we've talked about show and describe. Those are very rare. In fact, I probably only use show and describe when I'm looking in a database trying to find something, like find a field name or find a table. It's actually more often that you're going to write queries that do something to the database. And the categories of what you can do to a database fall into a pattern called CRUD, where you will often want to create, read, update, or delete. So that's where CRUD comes from. The C stands for create, the R stands for read, the U stands for update, which means like change it, and D stands for, let's see, delete or destroy. It looks like it is delete from what Wikipedia told me before the live stream. So that's what CRUD stands for. And in your journal, I kind of ask you to run a few sample queries. I have sample queries in here that some of them of which we're going to run by typing into the command line, and some of them are just here for illustrative purposes. So actually the first category of create statements, we're not going to do from the database or from the command line here. One thing that is particularly interesting about the WordPress database is there are so many fields where a value is required that I couldn't actually very easily give you a sample insert query to run against the post table, because we'd actually have to provide a value for everything from post author to comment count. So instead of doing that, I have provided a sample query where the way an insert statement works is it's insert into and then the name of the table. And then you can specify a list of the fields that you want to populate with data. So I called them field 1 through 4. And then you have the word values followed by what's a list of the actual values that you want saved to the database. And these align. So this field 1 lines up with value 1. There might be a world in which you find yourself writing an insert query in your future career, but I would bet that most of the time you are going to let tools that have been built by a content management system or by some other software to actually handle inserting the data. So the WordPress software that we're running when we visit the web page, and let me pull it up here. If I'm logged in and I go to my dashboard and I go to post and I add a new one, it is automatically, as soon as I click add new, going to be creating a post for me, and then I can type in values. And in the background, when it's automatically saving, it is handling either, if it's a brand new post, inserting something, or if I'm changing one, it would run a different query to update it. So that's what's happening with the forms that are being displayed on this WordPress web page. So sadly tonight we are not going to insert a new record. We're going to make up for that. We're going to write a lot of read queries. Let me check the chat room here and make sure I'm not missing anything here. So let's write a query right now. So I'm going to make some space here, and I'm going to write a query. And in my document, I type all the MySQL keywords as capitalized, but you don't have to capitalize them. So I'm going to write select star from WP users. The star can be, you can either list star to grab all fields, or you could actually list the fields that you want to select. If you don't know what fields are available to select, you can actually use that describe command. So I'm going to describe WP users first. It looks like in this table there's an ID, a user login, a user pass, a user nice name, a few other values. So let's just grab a few things. I'm going to select ID, comma, user underscore email from WP underscore users, semicolon. So this is a simple query. I'm asking the database for all of the records, and from all the records, I'm grabbing the ID and the user email for the records that appear in WP users. Now, I don't have many users. I only have one, so this query is kind of a letdown. But you can see how you can actually select just a few fields. Let's do that same query. I'm going to up arrow, and instead of ID and user email, I'm going to write star. And this is where it gets really hard to read, because remember, there's only one record, but because there are so many fields that have a certain length, it wraps onto 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines even though there's one record. It becomes really hard to read from the command line these results. So I wanted to show you something that a student helped me discover a couple years ago. You can, instead of typing the semicolon is actually a shortcut symbol that represents the word go, the command go, and there are alternative symbols that you can type. So instead of ending with a semicolon, you can end with a /G. So if I run that same query, the select star from WP users, and I get rid of the semicolon, and instead I type a backslash, the backslash is the one above the entry key, and then a G, it turns WordPress results into a different mode. It's called the vertical mode. And instead of trying to fit it in a really long width, it optimizes it so you can read the column names on the left and the values on the right. This is a way easier way to look record by record at something. So this works really well in the users table. Now you can actually see my password and name and URL, when the user was created, line by line. A lot easier to read. This becomes even more important when you're looking at something that has a lot of fields, like that post table. So if I select star from WP posts and I end it with a /G, you'll see that I actually get the separator and then all the fields that represent a single post over and over and over again. So that is my pro tip for you if you're using the command line like I am today. So that's a select query. Now we're just selecting all of the records, but more likely you're going to be writing queries that don't select all of them. Maybe they select just a subset of them. So I am going to write a query, and I probably should disclaim that at this point on, anything that's in this Google Doc cannot be copied and pasted easily, because the quotation marks that Google uses are curled. They're the curly quotes, and the quotation marks that you type at the command line are the straight ones. So if you're trying to copy and paste from here, you're going to have to backspace or move over and get rid of these quotation marks and fix them, which is kind of a bummer. But it actually allows you to practice in running the commands yourself. So I hope we can make that work. So here's an example. I'm going to shrink this up here so I can see it. Let's select just ID and post title. Post_title. Ooh, something's up. Let's try it again. Select ID, post title from WP posts. Now, if I ran that, it would return this small little table, or it looks like a table of just the ID and post title. That returned 10 rows. If I only wanted to get a subset of those, I could add a where clause. And I'm going to do that on post status equals, and then in double quotes, the word publish. Instead of all 10, I now only get 3, IDs 1, 2, and 5. And that's because these are the 3 that have a post status of publish. How did I figure out, before the live stream, how did I figure out that there was a post status of publish? Well, I could have read through all the database records with that select star. But actually, I ran a different query. You can have certain functions or filters that you run on individual fields. So I had a select statement that used the keyword distinct, and I said I want the distinct post status from WP posts. So it's like this modifying function, kind of like we had in JavaScript, on a particular field. So it's going to look through it's going to grab all the records and then only return the distinct post statuses. And that's where I saw that I had a draft, I had publish, I had auto draft, and I had trash, and I had inherit. Now, there's probably many records in the table, and some of them have each of these statuses. But that's where I discovered that publish seemed like a very interesting subset of records. Maybe I only want to look at the published pages. And so that's possibly why I would select a couple of the fields where the post status is publish. That's an example of a query that you might want to run for your database journal. All right, I'm going to pause here. How do you feel about these database queries so far? Okay, this is really good. You know what? All the students that I've had in my classes have actually given me positive feedback about databases. I wish we got to spend way more time on them. And I think WordPress is fun because you can go and use the GUI to create a bunch of pages and have some of them be deleted, some of them be drafts, and then you could actually write even more fun queries in here. I wanted to point out that there are many other filters and like functions that you can call on data. I had used distinct here, and I thought that was valuable. But the other type that I found that was pretty useful in the WordPress database were some of the date functions. So here's an example. I had select month, and then I gave it the post date field from WP Posts. So you can see that of my 10 records, many of them were modified or created or modified in March. A couple of them I adjusted today as I was playing around with things, so they have a value of 4. Month returns like the number of the month. We're in April, so that's 4. But there's also ones for day, year. There's lots of date math functions that are available. So I'm actually just going to change this query to select day from WP Posts, where month of the post date is equal to 3. So now I'm only going to grab the March posts, and I'm going to get the day that they were, I think it's created or modified or something like that. So these are all on the 26th, which I'm pretty sure our live stream was last week on the 26th. So that explains why all those were adjusted there. If you want to get a feel for just how many functions there are in WordPress, you can click on this link in the document and you'll see that it's a very, 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 very long list. It's often helpful for like running a test on something like I think I saw is null in here, or something like that. So like if you wanted it to return a true or false based on some value, then these functions are handy. When I get to the very bottom of this Google Doc, I have that section about how to fix your WordPress site if your IP address changes. And for this, I ended up taking advantage of the replace function, which I found on that list of functions, which was pretty handy. So there's so many things that you can do with MySQL queries. It's not even funny. I'm just giving you a taste of what's hopefully useful with the WordPress database. So if you were taking a course in databases, you would get to a point where you're writing all sorts of fancy queries to get information out of the database, and you'll find that some of the information you need is actually not stored in one single table. So if I take a look at the tables again, one thing that I think was interesting, if I took a look at the posts, if I select star from WP posts and I do that \G, at no point in here did I see Brandon Kish or B Kish or anything like that listed on the post. But there is this post author field, and it's a number. So if I describe WP posts, I just want to point out that author is an integer. Okay? It's an integer. It can't be empty. There has to be a value. And it's labeled as a key. If I go back to my table list, where do you think someone's name might be kept inside WordPress? Which table? I'm going to leave this screen up here. We got lots of WP tables, from options to links. We looked at posts. Where do you think someone's name is going to be kept? Oh yeah, you guys got it. Users. So let's describe the users table. Oops. WP_users. And you'll notice that this table also has an ID field, and it's an integer. In fact, if I scroll back up here, you'll see that the author was 1 here. And if I select star from WP users \G, there is only one user, and their ID number is 1. So I mentioned that databases, relational databases in particular, try to avoid duplicating content. If every time Brandon Kish created a post, it had to add my name to the post table, that would be really redundant. So instead, the concept of normalization forces database authors to separate out data that is going to be replicated into separate tables. So we have a post table, we have an authors table, and then that allows each post to be associated with an author who created it. right? So instead of it being an authors table, I guess it's a users table, right? So a user can be an author. So on the post, I can store a number that represents who authored it. If I wanted to get the name of that person, I can join to the users table to get that information. So let's write that query, and then I'll explain the foreign key, primary key concept that's at play here. So let's write a select. I'm going to select, I'm going to write a very simple select first. I'm going to write p.id, comma, p.postTitle from WP posts space p. So where did this p come from? Database administrators do not like typing the name of fields and do not like typing the name of databases and tables. We often take shortcuts. So one feature of every database system that I've ever used is aliases. So in this query, I can say that I want to grab I can give a name to posts. Instead of typing WP posts, I can alias it as P, so that then I can just type P whenever I'm selecting a specific field from a specific table. So this query, select p.id, I could have written that much more lengthy. I could have selected wp_posts.id, wp_posts.postTitle, oops, from WP posts. That gets super redundant. So what I can do is use these aliases to give the WP posts table a shorter name. Now, typically, you don't have to specify what table you're trying to get the fields from, but we're going to be selecting from 2 different tables. So it's going to be important that I can refer to exactly which field I want from which table, and that's why I'm setting up these aliases. All right. So this query, if it's working, is going to get me the IDs and the post title. It would be valuable for me to also, maybe instead of post title, I get post author from here. So post number 1 is written by post author 1. I guess they're all written by post author 1. So this is some of the information that I want. But what I really want to do is get the name of the person with the title. So let's keep writing this query, and I'm going to move my cursor around to make this a longer query as I'm writing. So how does a join work? Well, after a table name, I can actually write the word left join. There are left joins and right joins. It's based on which table you're starting in. So we're going to say that post is on the left and pretend that users is on the right of it. So left join, and then I say the table name. We're going to say WP users, and I'm going to give that an alias of u. And then I have to tell the join what field is it joining on. What is the connection between posts and users? Because this is a left join, I'm going to start with posts, and I'm going to say that the p.postAuthor is equal to the users table.id. So we have added a join here. We've added, after we have the post table, we're going to join that to the users table. Oh, and I forgot the important word here, the word on. That's probably why a lot of people like to capitalize these, is if you're missing any of the keywords, they kind of stand out to you because you're missing the capital letters. So we're doing a left join, and the fields that we're joining on are post author is connected to the user ID. Now, how will I know if this works? Well, I need to adjust my select list here. I want the ID, the post author. You know what? I will actually put p.postTitle back in here. And after p.postAuthor, I'm going to put a comma, and then I'm going to grab something from that users table. And I think we had user_email. So let's run the query. I might have a typo. That's totally fine. Oh, it looks like I got it, though. So at this point, we now have the post ID and the post title and the post author. That's that number 1. And then I have access to any field that's in the user table. I picked email because I could remember what it was, but if I describe WP users, I could have picked any of these other fields. Maybe I want the display name. We could go up a few levels here and change user_email to u.displayname. And I guess I didn't set it to Brandon Kish. It's showing bkish here as well. So that, I think that might actually be like the full name value, like Brandon Kish, if I wanted my name to be displayed as that. And WordPress actually does this type of query for you automatically when it's displaying every page. It's grabbing the post and then all the information it needs from the other tables. So these types of joins are done by WordPress automatically for you as it's rendering out the web page. But you wrote a query here. Think about how you could extend this concept. There's other tables that you could connect to. Let me show those tables again. We connected posts to users. But what I'll tell you is there's a concept of like tags and categories. Those are all kept inside of this crazy term relationships, term taxonomy, term meta, and terms tables because a blog post can have many tags or can have multiple categories. All that is stored in like 4 or 5 database tables. Users can have a lot of data on them saved in here. So there's these user meta fields or this user meta table, and let's take a look at what's in there. Let's select star from WP user meta \G. There's 20 records in there, and they're all associated with user ID 1. So like all of my preferences, like whether I'm logged in, when the last time I logged in was, what my permissions are, all of those are stored in that table. I'm trying to figure out what other ones I skipped the top one. So every post can have comments because it's a blogging system. So you might want to create some comments and then join to the comments table to list the comments for a given post. Or maybe you want to count how many comments there are for a post. That can be done with a query. Okay, so let's think back to when I connected posts to users. I had described WP posts, and there was a field here, post author, that underneath the key field said that it was a multiple key field here. Every database table needs to have some way to identify that a record is unique so that it's easy to find it in the database table. So in every database table, for performance reasons, we have to specify a primary key. Now, typically, most databases, like the WordPress one, will actually just pick a number, like a number that keeps going up uniquely every single time. In more complicated database systems, maybe that's more than one field, or maybe it's not even a number. Maybe it's like I think it's like a GUID. I forget what that stands for. What is a GUID? GUID. A globally unique identifier. So in some systems that don't use numbers, like I think even like Twitter, things like that, numbers would be insufficient for the number of things that there are. There's this concept of a globally unique identifier. And if I take a look at this page, if I generate some GUIDs, it might be this like hexadecimal looking number here or string that represents something uniquely. I have seen databases start to use that as a unique ID. Anyways, you need some sort of unique value representing that record. That's so that if you were to reference this content in another table, you can connect the dots like we did on the author ID. So this primary key exists in a table. So every one of our tables has a primary key. Users have a primary key. Posts have a primary key. When you're in the table with what you're starting with, that is the primary key. When you refer to content in another database table, like this post author, this is where this value that's actually stored in WP post, this is referred to as the foreign key. This is the unique number or the unique value that connects to something in another table. So the foreign key in this table is post author. It connects to WP users. If I describe that, there is a primary key in here of ID. So this concept of the primary key and the foreign key, it's all in terms of perspective. So if you're looking at, if I'm telling you I have this number 1, I could tell you that that is the primary key in the users table, and it's also the foreign key for the post author in the post table. So that's probably my favorite definition to talk about in class, and I hope that you're able to find resources that will help you understand this even better than I'm explaining now in the live stream. So whether you're Googling it or looking at that lynda.com course, I will be specifically looking at your definitions for primary key and foreign key. But they're the glue that connects the tables together. Does that definition make sense now that I've gone over it? I think you can follow along that there is this value that allows me to connect from one table to another. Did my attempt to connect that back to foreign key and primary key help. Okay, good. I'm getting some feedback that it is helpful. Good. Okay, so that was a join. I am asking you, hopefully in your journal, to try to do a join. You can reuse this concept with users, or if you're feeling brave, you can try to join to something else. In fact, my challenge here at the bottom of this page is, why do you think that there are multiple post records with the same title? Well, let me prove to you that there are. I'm going to select title ID and title from WP posts. I found this, post title. I found this very interesting, that I saw multiple records in the post table with the same title over and over and over again. So I actually made this one back on the 26th, and it appeared twice. And when I was exploring the WordPress database with students many years ago, we wondered what that was. And oddly enough, I'm going to wait for guesses, I guess. Someone's saying because they hit twice on each inquiry. That is not it. There is actually a better reason for there to be multiple entries for this single post in the table. And I'm going to see if I can, how can I give you a hint? I know what I can do. I'm going to go into WordPress and I'm going to find this post. I'm going to go back to the post page. I survived WordPress on LAMP. That's the post that showed up multiple times. I'm going to edit it. I'm going to change it to be, I almost survived WordPress on LAMP. I'm just going to go ahead and update it. Can you guess what we're going to see when I run this query again? Well, take a look. I almost survived WordPress is down here. Oh, my dogs are barking because someone's driving by our street here. Here's the title that I edited. I almost survived WordPress on LAMP. I also see other versions up here. I see I survived on WordPress LAMP, and I see I almost survived on WordPress LAMP. So in this table, it's actually creating multiple records for each version of the page. And I have to say that I'm still not entirely certain on why this I almost survived gets updated the very first version of the page, and then it keeps separate versions showing the history in the table. I actually, a couple of years ago, I swear this was different. I swear that the newest version down here, like the highest number, always had the right title, and then all of these were the original drafts. But today, it looks like when I updated a page, it changed the original and it changed the newest, but then it also kept the previous drafts. But this I find very interesting. So if I actually describe WP posts, there is if I look down this key field, there is this post parent field that's considered a foreign key, but it's a foreign key back to the same table. So if I actually take that query and I extend it to also grab the post parent, you'll see that the newest version here has a post parent of 5. That's the original version. So it's like the first entry in WP posts is always going to be the ID that represents the newest version, but then every alteration or version gets its own separate entry as well. And the way that this is all tied together is the parent goes up to the ID that represents like the final official version. Yeah, so it is definitely the version history. Yep, you're right in the chat room there. Now, writing a query that grabs the actual published version might be pretty difficult, but you should be able to join these together. And I had a student do it once. Let's do post status in here. What I think is interesting is on all of the different versions, the post status is always inherit. But then on the one that is the parent ID, so like the parent ID or the post parent for all of these versions is 5, right? This is one that has multiple versions. So the post status on that one is the one where it's published. So if you wrote a query, you could actually just grab all of the ones that are published and be confident that you're getting the latest version of the post. But if you wanted to, you could actually grab all the children and show what this is the child of through a fancy query that joins to the same table. And that's where those aliases for the table names would become really important. because you would name one the parent and one the child or something like that. So you can do crazy things with databases and database tables. You can represent relationships between tables, between multiple tables, between a table in itself. There's some really cool stuff going on there. So I hope that helped. I should probably continue going through all the CRUD stuff. So we've done read, update. I could do this one. I think I did this myself before class. I actually updated this first post. It used to say hello world, and I changed it to say hello world again. What I will say about updates is that the where clause is super important. If you wrote a query that said update WP post set post title equal to hello world 3, and if I didn't have the where clause, that would actually update every record in that table, which is a little terrifying. So I'm going to put a comment here. This would update all rows. Sad face. The following. The where clause is important. So when I wrote this query, which I'm not going to demonstrate again, I had to be very careful that I specified which one, the ID equals 1. There's a question in the chat room. How important is the caps on the commands? It's completely unimportant. I wrote them in here because you can kind of get a feel for which ones are the MySQL words and which ones are the words that represent the names of the tables. I have used database tools that will automatically capitalize keywords, which is kind of helpful. And if we have time, I'm going to show you that there is a way to use a different program to write database queries that will probably do the capitalization for you. But if you're writing them yourself, you don't have to capitalize them. Unless it helps you see which ones are the commands. I think I sometimes feel that way. All right, delete. We are not going to delete anything out of our database because that would be terrifying. In fact, what I wanted to show you is that if you deleted something, you would need that where clause, otherwise it would delete everything. And WordPress itself doesn't delete records. If I run this query, which I already did, there's actually a post status called delete. So I actually created a post called post to delete, and then I deleted it. And so there's two versions of it, the original, which is set to trash, and then the version of it before it was trash that says it's an inherit status. So even if you tried to delete something out of WordPress, it keeps the record in the table so that you could bring it back in the future. So we are not going to delete anything from our database. And very rarely do we build things at mid where data is actually allowed to be deleted out of the database. It's typically like there's a status field that you just toggle it to deleted or invisible or something like that. So that is CRUD. I kind of put all this together in this how to fix your WordPress site if your IP address changes. There is a place in the WP options table. So if I show tables, we have a table called WP options. And if I describe WP options, this table is pretty simple, or so it seems. Like it has 4 field values. If you try to actually select the data in there, it gets a little overwhelming. I'm going to select star from WP options with that /G so that I can see them line by line. There's actually 130 some values in here, or records in here. I don't think that this is easy to read, but what I will tell you is that there are settings in here for all aspects of WordPress, and the more settings you change, the more records that there are. I wrote a query here that will actually find the options where the IP address is included. So I wrote a select star from WP options where option value, and instead of the equal symbol, I used the word like. That triggers a wildcard search. And this wrapped onto a new line, but then in the quotations here, I used these % signs around my IP address. So let me paste this in. And it found the 2 options. They're actually option ID 1 and option ID 2 that have the name of the site URL and the homepage of the website listed. And this is where the IP address is hard-coded in WordPress. And if your VM changes IP addresses, you won't be able to visit the front page because it thinks it should be hosted at a different URL. So the login page breaks. So I found a way to update that. Now, the where clause is already provided for you. You would have to fill in your IP address and the new IP address, and it would use a replace to do a find and replace. So it's the same select criteria here. I ran this, and it changed my IP address to .999, which is an invalid IP address. And then I swapped everything back around to change it to 101. So I wanted to make sure that I actually provided this command because it's potentially going to happen to some of you if you're running a VM on a laptop, especially if you were to take that laptop from home to mid or something like that. So hey, that took 55 minutes, and we've talked about CRUD. Most of the programming that my team does is actually writing different types of database queries, essentially using a programming language that creates all sorts of CRUD operations. So we have been writing all of this in the command line tool. I would recommend that we stay in this mode for now, but I did want to tell you that yes, there are graphical tools, and there's one that's very popular for MySQL because the MySQL people make it. It's called MySQL Workbench. I am torn on whether I should put the links in Moodle because I don't want you to use this if you get caught with it not working. I'd rather you just use the command line yourself. And I actually ran into problems with this when I went to download it. The computer that I'm using for live streaming is not able to run the latest operating system of Mac OS. So I actually had to go find an old version to download. And so the version that I have on my computer running right now, let me close this. The version that I have running right here, this is my SQL Workbench. I'm not even sure if this is what it would look like if you were to download the latest version and install it. It is nice to use a graphical tool, though. The way this works is you can define connections to different MySQL servers. I created one for the WordPress database. And if I edit this connection, you'll see that I had to put in the IP address of my VM. Actually, I had to choose that I wanted to connect over SSH, and then I put in the SSH information, the MySQL connection information, including the MySQL username and password. And then I clicked test connection, and it would tell me that it was able to connect, or actually it gave me errors like 4 times in a row because I couldn't remember what the IP address was at first or what the password was. But then once you have this profile set up, you can just open this up to connect. And over on the left-hand side, you can actually see your databases that are available, and then see the tables that are available, and then see the fields that are available. And I'm pretty sure if I were to start typing, I would have to use I'd have to type use WordPress, and then I would have to write a command like select star from WP posts. And if I click this little lightning bolt icon, it runs the query, and you'll see that it returns kind of in like a little spreadsheet view each of the data values, and you could copy and paste and edit from here. You can do a lot of cool things, but it is very fiddly to get this set up and working. Now, it does do some cool color coding for you, but I'm sure if you use Atom, you could actually just turn it into MySQL mode to see the color coding if that's what you wanted. I did want to show you that these tools are available because if you were to become a database administrator, you'd likely start using something like this. And I'm kind of curious what you guys are saying in the chat room because I was left out. Do you think everyone will be okay with the command line version for now instead of trying to get Workbench working? Okay, yeah. All right. I'm glad you're fine with the command line. We'll stay there. Just know that if you're ready to take databases to the next level, there are tools available to help with that. Okay, so that is the end of my notes. Do you feel like you are prepared to talk about databases in the activity or in the definition activity, and maybe even run some queries for your database journal? Oh, someone in the chat said that when they took a database class, they were never allowed to use a program, just use command line. So, you know what? I'm keeping that spirit alive, but it's only because I don't have more than 1 week, and I can't run the same version as everyone else, unfortunately. But everyone's saying that they feel fine with the command line. That is good, and you are ready for your assignments. I'm going to cut the live stream off here. Thank you for watching, and I hope you are able to poke around the WordPress database to see how it stores information because it's kind of cool. So I will see you all in Slack.